traceability and the disadvantages of labeling GMO foods and Prop 37 in both the same and different cases. First, I'd like to talk about Proposition 37. Proposition 37's main goal was to inform everybody, all consumers, about what exactly is in their food. However, the proposition exempts almost 2/3 of the food that Californians consume. And it requires a special label on all soy milks, but exempts cow's milk and dairy products. Fruit juice requires a label, but alcohol is also exempt. Pet foods containing meat require a label, but meats for human consumption are exempt. All this information is taken from the California General Election official voter information guide. These arbitrary regulations and exemptions would benefit certain special interests as opposed to the everyday consumer, clearly because things so common as buying milk are not labeled as GE, even though they may be, or come from cows that are genetically modified. Also, food imported from China and other foreign countries do not have to label their products as GE simply if they say that the product does not contain GE ingredients. So, any foreign importers could very easily bypass this proposition, and therefore consumers will not know what is in their food, since a lot of food and ingredients do in fact come from foreign countries. And now, moving on to the disadvantages. Main point of genetically modifying crops and other plants is that they need to be more resistant to diseases and pests and things that reduce their yield to increase production and lower food costs. Approximately 54 of all soybeans cultured in the U.S. in 2000 were genetically modified. The number has increased dramatically since then. I think it's up to about 80% now. Corn production increased from 25% to 25% of all corn being GE in 2000, up from 1.5% in 1996. So that number is also steadily, dramatically increasing, simply because the benefit to having GE corn for farmers is too great to pass up. And as anticipated, all of these crops, on all of these crops, the pesticides and herbicide use was slashed because the GE crops are more resistant to the pests and weeds. The FDA's stance on GM foods is that they're substantially equivalent to unmodified natural foods and therefore not subject to the FDA regulation, which means that the FDA says that they do not need to be labeled based on their standards, and the FDA is an incredibly trusted organization. In cases where genetically modified plants and foods have been of great benefit to humanity, researchers at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology Institute for Plant Science have created a strain of golden rice that contains an unusually high content of beta-carotene, or vitamin A, which was introduced to very impoverished countries who had an epidemic of blindness due to lack of vitamin A. However, the grant that funded the creation of this strain of rice was not renewed because of Europe's stance on GM foods. Because there was too much protesting and nobody supported the research anymore. So these poor countries that were getting aid from GM foods are no longer getting that aid. Prop 37 bans these perfectly safe foods in California unless they are specifically labeled or remade with a higher cost ingredient that is not GMO. In 2006, the United States contributed 53% of the world's GM products. The U.S.'s economy to a decrease in GM ingredients being bought by consumers and farmers switching over to organic materials would be horribly catastrophic. And not to mention the lawsuits and regulations that would come out of Proposition 37. It is said that in the official voter information guide that the official state fiscal impact analysis concludes that administering Propositions 37's red tape, which means their strict regulations, and dealing with the lawsuits that come out of the proposition would cost taxpayers millions. Another thing in the direct text of the proposition, also pulled from the voter information guide, says that any person may bring an action into Superior Court pursuant to this section. So that means any citizen, any person who wishes to sue any company for not following the proposition may do so, completely unrestricted. The cost